If any of you, and I suspect all of you, at some time in your life read Parade, Time, Family Circle, Vogue, the Washington Post, the Baltimore Sun, the Chicago Tribune, or Money, or People, you are familiar with the name Karen Feld. If you listen to the radio, you also are familiar with this lady. She has been on WRC, I think with Eddie Walker at once, or once I heard her, and on Voice of America. If you look at the TV, you've seen her on TV with Joan Rivers, with USIA's Global TV network, with Maury Povich, I believe, most recently. She has followed our speaker for 2 decades, and there is no one better equipped to introduce him than this vibrant, articulate lady. Please join me in welcoming Karen Feld.
It was fortunate for all of us in many ways that young Jim Wright injured his knee in high school. It sidelined him from his life's ambition to be a football coach. No doubt he would have been a good one, but there are many good football coaches, and there is only one Jim Wright, political leader and Democrat. Coincidentally, Jim's football coach was also his world history teacher in Weatherford, Texas. And after taking that world history course, to Jim's surprise, he liked foreign affairs so much that his interest turned to politics. And it was in his junior year in high school that he decided that he wanted to serve. After flying combat missions in the South Pacific in World War II, for which he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, he was elected to the Texas legislature. Then in 1955, he began his 34 years of service in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was known there not only for his eloquent oratory, but also for playing a mean harmonica. He served in the House leadership for 12 years, first as Majority Leader from 1977 to 1986, and then as Speaker from 1987 to 1989. His election as Majority Leader was by a single vote margin, but later, more Democratic congressmen claimed credit for his victory than the number who actually cast votes. During his political career, Jim Wright carried on the great traditions of FDR. He kept up with the changing times, yet he never lost sight of the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. As leader and as speaker, it certainly didn't take him long to assert himself. His efforts to end bloodshed in Nicaragua and El Salvador are well documented. Speaker Wright still takes an interest in foreign affairs, and by the way, has always been a bipartisan foreign policy advocate. But it certainly helped when the president is a Democrat. He's personally known every Mexican president since the 1950s and has been able to converse with them in Spanish. He has frequently visited Mexico for meetings with top government and business leaders as well, and recently for discussions on the North American Free Trade Agreement. In addition to keeping up with foreign affairs and Washington and Texas politics, Speaker Wright lectures around the country. He teaches a class on Congress and the presidents at Texas Christian University back in his hometown of Fort Worth. He also writes a newspaper column and is working on a book on Congress and the presidents. He's also working on his memoirs. Since the Speaker's retirement, he says he's enjoying a slower-paced lifestyle in Fort Worth. Slower paced? I'm exhausted just talking about it. Despite being in the public eye for so long, Speaker Wright values his privacy and his time with his biggest supporter, his wife Betty. And we're pleased, of course, to have Betty Wright with us here today. And I want to add, Betty was a professional tap dancer 40 years ago, and now, despite foot problems, is taking lessons again. But according to Betty, the speaker is very romantic and even uses his renowned verbal talents to write poetry to her. Today, Speaker Wright is still recognized wherever he goes by the taxi driver in D.C., as well as heads of state, and he's just as thrilled to talk to one as the other. On the kinder and gentler side, Speaker Wright told me recently that he often feels like a clergyman now. His former colleagues are always coming to him for advice, both political and personal. His judgment is highly valued, and his kind of loyalty is very rare in this town. Speaker Wright has spent much of the last 4 years working on his recently published book, Worth It All. He had to go through thousands of pages of handwritten notes, documents, and transcripts of oral history tapes that he made while he was Speaker. The book details his role in the United States, Nicaraguan, Central American peace efforts in his years in the House leadership, including his personal and political turbulence immediately preceding his resignation from the House. Many of you here today have probably heard the speaker recently on radio and television talk shows talking about the book, Worth It All. I noticed last week that the speaker's book was number 5 on the Dallas Morning News bestseller list, right up there with Maggie Thatcher, Howard Stern, and Rush Limbaugh. How's that for company? Speaker Wright hasn't been booked on Howard or Rush's show yet, but he certainly could handle it. He's never at a loss for words, and he's one of the best storytellers that I know. In fact, Jim Wright has always been considered a pro in dealing with the media. But he did confide to me a couple weeks ago that the only time he had a touch of stage fright was before he did the Larry King show. Speaker joked that he was afraid that Larry wouldn't have the right questions for his answers. Today, we're pleased to let him give the answers, and then we'll all ask the questions. It's with great pleasure that I present our friend, a true Democrat, and someone who for us will always be Mr. Speaker.
Well, you know, after that kind of an introduction, anybody would know that any lawyer worth his salt would just rest his case. There isn't any way you can improve upon that. I thank you.